are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for attending the STN monthly webinar. This session is being recorded so it can be offered as on-demand CE for our members. Your lines are muted, so please type any questions into the question queue on the GoToWebinar control panel. We will have a Q&A at the end of today's presentation, time permitting. STN is an accredited provider of continuing nursing education. To claim CE for this session, you must attend the entire session and complete the online evaluation of the presentation. If you are attending this live session, you will receive an email about 1 hour after the event with directions to complete the evaluation. Certificates will be emailed approximately 7 to 14 days after today's event. If you are viewing the session as on-demand CE, you'll be able to download your certificate after completing the quiz and the evaluation. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, James Donnelly. James Donnelly joined Hammett Medical Center in 1998 and currently serves as both Chief Nursing Officer and Chief Quality Officer. In this capacity, he has full responsibilities for nursing services throughout UPMC Hammett, as well as oversight of the emergency department. Since joining Hammett, Mr. Donnelly has made a significant impact on the organization by spearheading numerous process improvement teams and quality initiatives to elevate the level of care provided to UPMC Hammett patients. These initiatives include the implementation of IV smart pump technology with the infusion team, the execution of the online incident report system with IM data, the creation of metrics and goals for patient safety and quality, and the origination of nursing M&Ms. Prior to joining Hammett, Mr. Donnelly was employed by Millard Fillmore Health Systems. He served on the cardiovascular leadership team and was director of the clinical perfusion services. In the past, he has also served as a clinical perfusionist. Please welcome James Donnelly.
Thank you, Cody. Good afternoon, everyone. As Cody mentioned, I'm Jim Donnelly. I'm the Chief Nursing Officer at UPMC Hammett. I'm going to share with you today a journey that we as an organization have taken and I have taken in transforming our leadership skills and share with you some of our strategies and concepts for improving our organization's performance. Before we begin, I'll share with you a few brief learning objectives associated with this organization. At the end of this program, a participant will be able to describe how we have taken the approach of reshaping our thoughts, words, and actions to reflect those of transformational leadership, how to implement a cultural framework to engage and inspire and empower your team, and how to develop goals that address and benefit patients, nurses, the organization, and the community at large. I have no conflicts or conflicts of interest to disclose. This is approved for 1 contact hour and will be available online. And for those taking the exam, as Cody mentioned, online, passing a quiz is required. So our story begins and ends with us achieving magnet designation at UPMC Hammett. And we received official word from ANCC on March 21st, 2016. We used throughout our journey the Himalayas and specifically Everest as an analogy or metaphor for our journey. This designation obviously is associated with some prestige, but it is also associated with an element of risk. In order to achieve something as significant and lofty as magnet designation, there's a level of teamwork and engagement that is really unique and unique to something like an expedition to the peak of Everest. And so as we looked back in time and prepared for our survey, we were undergoing an exponential rate of growth at Hammett. We saw our daily census, overnight census, increase by in excess of 15%. That presented some staffing challenges, and those staffing challenges were reflected in our nurse engagement scores, which we received on November 2015. So we're anticipating a magnet site survey visit, and we get nurse engagement survey scores that show a decline in every element of the practice environment scale. This caused a lot of concern amongst my leadership team and really put us in a situation where we thought our ability to succeed on the survey was in jeopardy. Indeed, on December 11th, as we gathered for a retreat, and I certainly understood and knew what everyone was thinking, I asked them to articulate, what are you thinking? What are the thoughts? And we used a nominal group technique to get everyone to begin to articulate their anxieties. They each wrote on Post-it notes some of the things that were weighing on their minds and their thoughts as we approached the survey, and then we transcribed those Post-it notes up onto a large marker board. And you can see from the slide here, there were not a lot of positive thoughts in the room on that day. How can we be magnet? There was anger from some people talking about trolls, lots of stress, anxiety, etc. So I took it upon myself to share with my team some learnings that I had received from my C&O collaborative at UPMC. And this collaborative was really based upon a really interesting approach to neurophysiology and understanding how our minds work, and then using that understanding to improve our outlook and our ability to lead in situations of adversity. And to briefly summarize this, as beings, we're wired to respond to stressful situations with very often anger. And typically in the literature that's referred to as the amygdala hijack. As animals, we've been programmed to, when we see a threat, to bypass our cortex, the rational brain, to the limbic system, and to respond in an unthinking way. And that's what comes out in our expressions of anger and stress, and limits our ability to lead in situations where the environment, the factors that are influencing the environment around us are unfavorable to what we want to achieve. I then, after asking them to think about how their brains are wired and how their brains behave natively, I offered them a story as a point of hope and a way in which we could perhaps begin to recognize special things in ourselves. And the story goes back to October of 2010 and involves the San Jose mine in Chile. This was a privately held mine. This mine was not very well managed in terms of worker safety, with frequent deaths and fines for failure to maintain safety. And on August 5th, 2010, inside this antiquated mine, which had basically a helix of 3 miles of winding, spiraling roadway down 800 meters under the ground, a collapse occurred at 500 meters, trapping 33 miners. The miners were at a location nearly 800 meters below the surface. As a result of the collapse, they were held within a chamber filled with acrid dust, high temperatures, and blinded. They breathed through wet rags for over 6 hours, and as the dust cleared, their situation really became apparent. They had approximately 2 to 3 days worth of food and water rations and little hope for escape. The mine, because of its helical nature of the roads and its antiquated, was not filled with miner safety equipment. It did not have any emergency escape routes, and drilling rescue boreholes would be very difficult given the very uneven approach to drilling down into the ground that had characterized the development of the mine. As late as August 12th, now fully 7 days after the collapse, A borehole into a presumed refuge yielded no sign of life. A week had gone by, and again, only 3 days' worth of food and water amongst the miners. On August 22nd, fully 17 days into the ordeal, upon withdrawing a drill bit that had entered into another refuge, a note was found attached to the drill bit. At the end of that note, in that note contained a message: Estamos bien en el refugio los 33. We are safe in the refuge, the 33. Imagine this, 3 days of food and water, and they were still alive 17 days later. How? Well, beneath the surface, the leader was transformed. Foreman Luis Orzua recognized the gravity of the situation, and he took unique steps. In a space that was a little bigger than a room, 540 square feet with 2 benches, he assembled the 33 men and began to make plans for rescue and escape. He gave them things to do. He gave them assignments, including making maps, thinking about finding access tunnels for potential rescue. He busied them on the work of hope. His leadership created a level of hope. On October 12, 2010, a rescue shaft 2 meters wide finally reached the miners, and Manuel Gonzalez was the first rescuer to descend into the mine and see the men for the first time. When he entered, the mine was 104 degrees. Imagine this, 69 days beneath the surface. Again, one has to wonder, how was this achieved? When he reached the mine, he found that the miners already had a plan for how they would extricate the miners. Who would go first? Florencio Avalos was the first to ascend. He was selected because he was seen as the most fit and emotionally stable, the individual who would best be able to handle any complications when that rescue pod was pulled up out of the mine for the very first time. He was the skilled. After that, they had an order for the weak and then finally the strong. And fully 70 days later, because the process took overnight, Luis Orzua was the very last miner to the surface. And when he exited the pod, he hugged his son, he embraced President Pinera, and he declared, "I've delivered to you this shift of workers as we agreed I would." A remarkable thing in terms of human survival, a remarkable thing in terms of human engineering, but the influence that Luis had on those men over those months was a source in which I asked our team to draw inspiration and to look at our situation and know that if these men could do this, certainly we're capable of finding a way to turn our organization around. And this is where we come back to the idea of how our minds are wired and how they work. And I pointed out, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. Pessimists see that glass as half empty. Optimists see it as half full. And transformational leaders like Luis envision the glass as full and then begin the work of making it so. We needed to think of ourselves that way. The human mind is an incredible tool. Too often we think of it as a filing system. Memories or something, discrete elements, folders, and files that we put away and recall from time to time. But really the brain is more like the World Wide Web with a very diverse storage process that is not really made up of discrete files, but instead we form memories by forming connections between neurons. We experience the world around us. We fire neurons in response to that stimuli, that experience, and the pattern at which we fire those neurons, the synapses, actually becomes the memory. And these engrams, if we fire them frequently enough, become familiar to our brain and are easily recalled. If we fire them once, they go away. If we fire them frequently, they become memories. Our personalities and our perspectives are the same. If we fire our brains in a manner that fosters an optimism, we will transform our perspective. If we fire our brains frequently from a perspective that is pessimistic, we'll be pessimists. And so we need to also think about who we are. What is our native state to begin with? Am I an anxious person? Am I an optimist? Am I basically always positive and joyful? It's an important assessment to begin as you transform yourself. And as I talk about this, I have to tell you that my transformation, my personal journey, was one in which I was a pretty reactive guy. And as we began the journey towards magnet designation, it was obvious to myself and my team that I had become a different person. And so as I tell you this story and as I talk about these concepts of change, I'm offering you a personal testimony that I was the red guy, anger, and that I have been transformed in a lot of ways, maybe not to Joy herself. I have a 5-year-old, by the way. That's why Inside Out is so featured here. But I am definitely a different person as a result of this journey, and that I have been taught these concepts by others. They have worked for me and they have worked for my team, and I share them now with you. If you understand and embrace who you are and the workings of your mind, you can create lasting change within yourself. And if you create that change within yourself, then you will create the change that you want to see in others, because they will follow you. And so that's really the methodology here we're talking about. Leading and managing for sustainable change, and that it begins on the inside of us. It begins with our attitudes and emotions. It begins with how we think about what we see, how we feel. And then that affects what we say and do, and that translates into results. An important concept is to embrace the idea of servant leadership. For many of us, when we step into leadership, we see ourselves in a servant role, and we feel that we're doing our best, but very often we default to a sort of heroic approach to leadership. Sometimes we try and make decisions on our own, unilaterally, because ultimately we have the authority, but more importantly, the responsibility. And so we see decision-making as a responsibility that we have to make. And we can sometimes overlook the importance of input and partnering with our teams. That's a transition I had to make. I made a lot of decisions on my own. Individuals who are in leadership positions are often very bright individuals. They're used to relying on their intelligence. Effective leadership, servant leadership, means transforming your perspective to engage and solicit input from others on your team, many others, and let that guide your decision making. In the end, the wisdom of the crowds is smarter than the smartest of us alone in a room. An important part of soliciting folks is influencing their perspective. Many people default into a problem focus. They see what's wrong. They talk about what's wrong. It fuels anxiety, which leads to reactivity in the team and pulls people further towards the problems. As leaders, this is where we have to begin with how we're wired internally. We have to think about our default behaviors, overcoming them if they're inappropriate, and moving towards a more proactive and outcomes focus. What do I want? What would I like to see? As we begin to focus on these outcomes, it fuels a passion, a seeking behavior. It gets us doing things proactively. And as we begin to do that, we start to achieve measures of success, and people are drawn towards us, and they begin to see the behaviors that we're modeling as things that are desirable to them, and they begin to follow suit. And a momentum begins to build across an organization. As a result of this kind of a transition in my head, I have seen many more people engage with our goals and help with problem solving. My job has become easier by becoming more proactive and more outcomes focused. Conversely, if you're problem focused, that's all you see. The glass is always half empty. As you read in the literature, especially on leadership, you always find that the most effective leaders are focused on the desired income, or desired outcome, and income, I guess, if you're successful. And they invest very little energy into existing problems. I often counsel new nursing directors who come to me often very concerned about the problems on their unit. That's okay. Those exist everywhere. I caution them. You need to think about how you apportion your time. There are many people on your unit who are doing exactly what they should be doing and sometimes doing extraordinary things. If you're spending half of your time on your problems, you have a problem focus. You need to shift your thinking. Once we begin to shift our thinking, we get to goal setting. And in healthcare, a default in goal setting is often to set avoidance goals. Goals about avoiding infections as opposed to achieving things. Approach goals are things that are desirable, things we want to achieve. And this is an important piece of psychology. Lots of compelling research out there that says just how we state a goal to our team will influence the level of engagement and participation and therefore success we get out of that. A little bit simpler and more concise example from a nursing perspective. Nurse A wants to be a senior pro RN, get to the top of the clinical ladder, and works hard to move up that ladder. Nurse B, and many of us probably have colleagues like this, doesn't want to get demoted and does what's necessary to keep her position as a senior pro on the clinical ladder. Which of these is better suited to a nurse's well-being, which is going to inspire and engage? Obviously A is. And so we always want to consider the approach of the idea of approach goals over avoidance goals. Personal goal. I actually authored this talk back in December when we were facing our magnet site survey. And at the time, I weighed 185 pounds, which was one of the heaviest weights I'd ever been. So I stood up in front of the room and said, I really want to be 169 pounds. Now that's not the goal. That's a metric, a measure of the goal, but it's not the goal. And as we were approaching New Year's, I could give up I could have stated it as an avoidance goal. Romulo's is a very popular chocolatier in town here. I could say I'm going to give up Romulo's because I have a weakness for that, but that's clearly an avoidance goal. And I'm not going to do well on that long term. At some point, I'm going to grow tired of denying myself that luxury. And so a better approach goal is to attain a state of optimum health and wellness through regular exercise and enjoying healthy foods. Note, I don't have to give up Romulo's. I just have to use moderation. Also, it's important to avoid action items or metrics as goals. Run, jog 3 miles 3 times per week is a plan or an action item. It's not a goal. And so whether we're talking about our personal goals or our professional goals in terms of patient care and trauma, we need goals that engage and inspire our teams. We need to be proactive in our thinking and our language. Too often people tell us what the problems are. We don't have enough resources. I don't have enough time, too many priorities, etc. Instead, proactive words like will, choose, can have a profound impact. An important point here, think of marketing. Think of Coca-Cola. There's nothing in nature that's that equates to Coca-Cola. There's nothing natural about it. It's bad for us. It's filled with phosphates and sugar. It contributes to obesity. Yet the marketers have convinced us, they have put it in our heads that it's refreshing and that it is a source of reward. They've proactively affected our thinking through their language and the images that they use. We need to take this approach to leadership because the things that we're doing, when we talk about trauma, the impact that we have on our patients, their families, and our communities, that's inspiring. That's important work. It's goal-directed. And if we use the right words to describe it, it can be profoundly motivating to our teams. That's why I emphasized the idea of concentrating on not only your outcomes, but your assets, the strengths that your team has, the possibilities, the synergies. What can we utilize to move ourselves towards the goals? Admittedly, we have to be mindful of what our deficits are, what our challenges are, but that should occupy 20% or less of our thinking. And when it does, your team will become more successful. As leaders, think about words. Words are profoundly important. I have these two lists here. One will empower and engage your team. The other will sort of disconnect from them. And so this is where we've talked about what we think, how we feel, and now what we say will impact what people do and what our results look like. As a homework assignment in our group, we actually asked folks to think about the disempowering words that are most common to their vocabulary. We provided this list of how those words can impact people and their feelings so that they understood why they shouldn't use those words. And then we asked them, think of the 3 words from that disempowering list that you use most often. For me, it's but. That's number 1. That was one of my 3 words. I would say all sorts of things that were first nice. Hey, that's a nice outfit, but, and when I throw that but in there, it completely cancels out anything positive that I said, and the last thing that they remember is that negative that I said to them. It disengages, it disempowers, it disenfranchises. Replace but with and you can now inspire people to leverage their strength and improve. I gave this talk recently at one of our local universities to the faculty from the School of Nursing, and one of the audience members sent me this graphic to the right. If you want to reach your goals, you must shrink the size of your butt. I told her I was going to include that from here on. As we begin to impact our language and how we talk to our staff, now we have an ability to move them away from the drama of trauma to a new place of empowerment. And again, much like a problem focus, a drama focus, in a drama focus there are players, but we have a victim, someone who is focused on the problem. They feel powerless. They usually blame somebody, and if you're a leader, it's usually you. So you become a persecutor. And those of us in nursing who are leaders, we really don't want to be persecutors, so we always rush to the rescuer role too. And what happens is we become enablers. We don't, we want to be needed. We want to be liked, and so we start to solve the problems for the victim. And the victim, it becomes a cycle that and we're running from role to role. And we seem like we can never get out of where we are. Sometimes emotions are frayed, and people get really reactive. And if you lose your temper, like I've been known to do, then you're fully a persecutor, and you find people shifting roles. We got to hit the pause button. We got to step back, and we have to think how we can change our roles from persecutors and rescuers to teachers and coaches, and how we can engage the victim to become co-creators and help us create solutions. Again, it goes to words. And so when the victim talks about a situation or a problem that is undesirable, we begin first and foremost with, how can we do this? How can we get to where we want to be? And as we use the right language, we begin to engage them in the problem-solving activity. And once we get a solution, once we get a plan, and a plan that they've been a part of, they begin to own this. As they own it, they become our partners in solving the problems, and then our jobs as leaders get easier. Some really good cues and questions here are simply asking people, what are your ideas? Because very often you'll ask somebody, well, what do you want? And they can't articulate that. They just know what's wrong. And so you have to begin to bring them along with open-ended questions, but questions that use those empowering words. What are your ideas? And when the first idea comes out, you go to, well, what else? What else? And if you knew that, then what would you do? The very last thing we want to do is contribute our thoughts. Our thoughts are last. Because if we're going first to our thoughts and our ideas, then now we're falling into that heroic leadership role rather than the servant leader. The servant leader engages. He pulls out thoughts and ideas from the staff. One of the things that I like to do is whenever I'm with a group and I want to make sure that everyone contributes, is use a nominal group technique. Use little pads of Post-it paper. I give everyone a pad. I say, okay, I need 3 ideas from each of you. Write them down. Too often we're afraid to take some time and require some people to think and require them to participate. Sometimes we're afraid of what they'll say. I used to be very, very afraid of that. But I've seen the transformative impact that engaging them and making them think can on our organization, our solutions, and our successes. Take time to coach people from drama to empowerment. What you're doing when you're doing that is focusing on your relationships. And I can't emphasize this enough, especially from my perspective. Again, going into the personal confessions here, many people would tell you that 3 to 5 years ago, I was a very results-oriented person. I was focused on the metrics. I was focused on the action items that needed to be done. And my emphasis on that meant that my ship created an unbalanced wake, and that relationships were not given enough attention and care. And, you know, you can tell a lot about where a ship is going by the wake it leaves. An uneven wake means a ship is just going in circles. And that's a common thing that we saw. We would take 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. We would achieve a result, and then we would fall back to baseline. And I think the real rationale there was that I failed to cultivate relationships and engagement at the level that I needed to achieve the results and to sustain the results that we were after. Some ideas on our focus on relationships is, as a result of your leadership, some important questions to ask. You know, where are people feeling like they've learned something of value and grown as a result of the interaction or the process? How has their trust been enhanced? There's a difference between just learning and trusting. Have you improved trust as a result of your interaction or involvement in a project? Have you built their confidence? Are they more hopeful, courageous, and have they been inspired? Or are they more resentful, less trusting, less confident? And if they are, they're going to be less hopeful and less courageous. And what can you do to improve that going forward? Likewise, you can overemphasize your relationships, and you can be too focused on pleasing people. and you miss the idea of actually achieving your desired outcome or exceeding expectations. Did you set the right goals? Did you get enough innovations included into your program? All of these things will eventually impact the long-term success of a project, task, or goal. Marry all of this together. Take your perspective. Take how you react to the world around you. Take what you say to your team. Take your goals and take your relationships and apply them in a way that creates a tension within your organization. If you've invested in all of those things, even though your current reality is well below where you want to be, you still need to be able to create a greater goal, a compelling goal, a stretch goal that creates a little concern, a little tension amongst your team. They have to believe that what you're trying to do requires their focus, that will require their efforts, and that they have the strengths and the assets to contribute to that effort to make a difference. In the end, when you do all of that, the team aligns, begins to break through barriers that they thought were impossible before, and you achieve that greater goal that no one really thought was possible. Again, from a relationship perspective, make sure you celebrate that goal. Notice that on this graphic, 80% of the work is on achieving that greater goal, 20% of the time on the current reality. That's an appropriate distribution of your time. I always advocate people to place less and less emphasis on the current reality. I'm more happy with a 90-10 focus. Once you've achieved a success, debrief on that. Break it down. What worked? Why did it work? What can we do different and better? This is a framework that we have utilized. One of our big successes here at UPMC Hammett has been an employment initiative. We targeted underprivileged youth who would largely be perceived as unemployable. We engaged with a local faith-based organization. That organization, through some community funding, put together a 4-week program to prepare these young people to become employees. And these included basic skills like getting a bank account, getting a cell phone with reliable service, how to dress, how to interview, how important it was to show up on time, to have a plan A, B, and C for child care, etc. And then once they completed that employability program, we put them into a 4-week internship that taught them job skills, entry-level job skills. And at the end of that internship, if they were successful in all of those 8 weeks, we had them apply for vacant existing positions. And we transformed 65 of these underprivileged young people into healthcare professionals over the course of the 8-week time frame. We had tremendous success, and we celebrated that. We celebrated that across the organization, but we also reviewed the process and found many opportunities to improve. And when we begin our next cohort in October, I think we're going to be even more successful in helping transform these young people's lives. Our after-action debriefing has been pivotally important to that success. Finally, feedback. And I begin with how to take feedback. As you open up and ask people to tell you what they think, they will. And that's going to hurt. And one of the things that we have to develop as a first skill is to listen without defending or justifying, to just shut up and take it, if you will. The top left there is Joanne Sorensen from my team. She's a DNP nurse in charge of our women's services and our regulatory efforts here at UPMC Hammett, and she always reminds us that criticism, feedback, is a gift, hence the gifts below. And those gifts tell us where we have to go. It is important that we press the pause button as we're listening. that we pay attention to our internal response, that we are not letting our limbic brain conduct an amygdala hijack and make us emotional and reactive. That instead, we engage our cognitive brain, we kick in asset-based thought, and we begin to think about solutions. We should reflect back from people. So what I'm hearing you say is blah, blah, blah. That confirms that we've heard them, and it also gives us an opportunity to really address what we need to do in terms of action planning. Because nothing's more impactful for staff members than to know that their words were heard and that we're going to do something about it. And as that happens, it's much easier to engage them and to ask them to be a part of the solution. Then and only then, after learning how to get feedback, can we begin to talk about giving feedback. And I always emphasize to my team that the first thing we want to do is ask for that. Can I give you some feedback? May I offer some feedback? As we do that, we want to also think about making that feedback feed forward. Again, the language, very important. Avoiding our disempowering words like but and using and. You do a great job, and I'm certain that if you apply those skills, you can address this issue. It brings people in. It allows them to trust you. And I'm not saying that we avoid the truth. We address people's issues. We have critical conversations. You'd be surprised. Our organization has gone through a lot of transformation in the last few years in being intentional about this. One of our culture of safety survey experiences, and this goes back to 2012, we did not get the culture of safety survey results we were expecting. They were disappointing to us. And as a result of that, we wanted to understand them better. And so one of the very first things we did was to invite feedback. We met with many members of our staff, including our medical staff, and said, when you said this was a punitive environment, what does that mean to you? And in a meeting with our medical staff department chairs, a debriefing, one of the department chairs said a very telling thing about critical feedback and critical conversations. He said, do I think that there's a black folder in the CMO's office and my name is in that and is on that and everything bad thing I've done is there? No, I don't. But I do think that if I'm working, this was an anesthesiologist, I do think that if I'm working in a case and a surgeon is unhappy with me, that he is not likely to address it with me, that he's likely to wordlessly leave the room, go to the phone and call the chief medical officer and tell him what I did that aggravated him, rather than speaking to me and giving me that feedback directly. And so we've identified that idea of conflict management as a great learning opportunity. And one thing we've done from a nursing perspective is if we encounter a situation, it is our duty as nursing leaders to go and speak to the physician. We want to respect the individual. We respect their position, but we want to respect the individual first and say, may I give you some feedback? Because if we're never honest with people, how can they trust us? The impact on that, whenever we do that, is profound. We always get a thank you. Thanks for bringing this to me. I appreciate that. And as we model that behavior, we're seeing a greater willingness to talk to each other about those critical situations in the moment. So you bring all these things together, when you commit to the ideas of servant leadership, when you begin to modify your thoughts and then your feelings and then your words and then your actions, it begins to trigger new results and a transformative change takes place, something very intentional that takes you towards your goals. And you begin to engage, inspire, and align your team around common goals. And when they come together, they can achieve some really cool stuff. And so I mentioned to you that in December, we were fraught with absolute anxiety as we anticipated our magnet site survey in mid-January. And I think to a person, we were convinced that we were in for a very, very rocky road when those surveyors came into our organization. But on January 13th, when they came in, it was a different place. And on January 15th, when they left, and each day we had a flash mob in the lobby and down the hallway to administration, wherein a couple hundred people would appear in a moment's notice to welcome the site surveyors. When they left on January 15th, they identified 0 deficiencies and 4 exemplars, and on March 21st, we have received our official designation as a magnet hospital. And I would tell you that this achievement was about a transformation in each of us on the leadership team. To be transformational leaders, to take a different and asset-based approach to our problems, and to influence our staff in a way that we really never thought was possible. And so, although it's corny, to pull out a quote at the end, I'm telling you, I absolutely believe that you must first be the change you wish to see in the world or in your team, and that when you do that, you'll see magical results. Cody, I think that's a summation of my talk, and we have a little time for questions.
Yes, thank you. As of now, we have one question in the question queue. So again, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type those in, and we'll get to those now. So the first question is, how important is it to set a goal and to celebrate the success of that goal?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Goals. So when you set your goals, first and foremost, make them stretch goals. They have to be goals that are scary to you. Now, I mean, certainly we can't set a goal. I will learn to fly within 2 weeks. No, that's not physically possible. But I think it's, as an example, if you asked any of our nurses in the organization right now, what is the institution's goal for central line associated bloodstream infections? They would tell you, our goal is 0. We're not there yet, but that's our goal, to eliminate central line associated bloodstream infections, to have 0 infections. I think that you have to say that stuff out loud to really impart the gravity and the scope of the undertaking that's before you.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is also involved with goals. Is it important to discuss the goals, whether it failed or succeeded?
Oh yeah, we fail a lot. We fail a lot. You're not doing anything if you don't fail. So a point of clarification on why our anxiety was so high in December. When we submitted our first set of magnet documents, we failed. They sent them back to us and said, I'm sorry, you will not be moving on. And I responded to that event by turning around and typing a message to every one of my nurses, an email message. And I explained to them what had happened. I took accountability for, and we sort of rushed that. I think we were a bit ambitious. I took accountability for that. I think on my part, there was an arrogance and ignorance around it to think that we could get that document done so quickly, and that I knew that we could achieve this. I also told them, I need you. I need you to stay with me. I need you to be a part of this. I need you to know that we will succeed. And so we did talk about that, and that's a part of why we were so anxious in December, is that we knew what failure tasted like, and it was something, when you go through it, you know it's a reality, and you don't want it again. So that's perfectly fine to talk about it. And in the end, I think it inspires people. It lets them trust you, to know that you're human and that failure is a possibility, and that I need to be a part of this if we're going to succeed.
Thank you. The next question. What is the best method or venue of introducing these leadership concepts to the entire institution, and specifically outside of trauma?
Mm-hmm. So I started my own world. First, I want my team to be the change that we want to see in the organization. And so this is now over a year ago, our UPMC chief nurse executive brought the 20-plus CNOs together for a program like this. And we went through this program over a course of months. I'm giving you a snapshot of what the program really looks like. And as we did that, I watched this group of very successful individuals, and I'm very intentional about the word group because some of us are hundreds of miles apart. Erie and Altoona are literally hours and hours apart by car. We all meet in Pittsburgh. Some of us traveling 100 miles. We're a group. We're a team, but we're not truly a team as we should be when the program starts. As we go through the program, as we begin to become aligned, and as we begin to understand and share and learn together, I watched this group become a team. I watched us come around to the idea of system initiatives for nursing. And I realized that I needed this for my team. And so we've committed to this over the course of the year. And if you look at the program, one of those very first slides, there are really 4 elements here. There's 2 elements that are sort of inside out, and then there are 2 elements that are on the outside. And so we've taken an approach of quarterly retreats, and we begin with the first piece of understanding our minds and who we are, and the nature of how we see and respond to things is important. And then the next is what we say and how that influences our team. And then the third is really what we do. And then the fourth is breaking it down into looking at how we multiply that, how we use structural tension and after-action debriefs to multiply our successes going forward. So my model, I've expanded. I went through it over a course of maybe 4 months with the CNOs. On an internal basis, we're doing it as a series of quarterly retreats, and I'm doing it in conjunction with my strategic plan. If you're in charge of a trauma program, you might do it in a more consolidated basis over a series of months with your team. But the idea is to put it into action. We assign accountability partners. So there was one sort of homework assignment slide in here to pick 3 disempowering words that you use most often and replace them with words from the empowering list. In each instance where I participated in the program, we assign an accountability partner. So Jim and Cody would be accountability partners, and we would actually kind of keep an eye on each other, and we would share. I would tell Cody, well, I want to replace but with and so forth. And then as we work together in the days and weeks after that, every once in a while, if Cody hears me say but, he's like, hey, accountability. And we begin to influence our behaviors and reinforce them. You have to have a plan to continue this beyond just the classroom setting, to actually apply it and influence your behaviors.
Thank you. The next question, did you have shared governance before moving into the magnet journey? If yes, how did it come to be? And if not, what made the transition easier?
So we've had shared governance for 9 years. I have been the CNO for a little over 9 years. I've been the CNO for 8 years. When I first started shared governance, the councils were kind of a spectator sport. 50 strangers would gather in a room, didn't speak to each other much. There would be presentations by nursing leaders, and they would get their points for their career ladder, and then they would go back to work. Today, shared governance is not a spectator sport. They are partners and equals with our nurse executives. They make things happen in the most amazing way. I recall about 3 years ago, I went to a magnet conference. I heard about DAISY. I came back. I said, boy, this would be cool. I talked about it at our Practice Environment Council. And this is sort of the moment where I knew, like, uh-oh, we're getting there. They said, we'll run this. I'm like, well, what do you mean you'll run? We'll run this. Well, this could be our project. We can do this. And they took it. And DAISY now, every month, generates 150 nominations. DAISY nominations come in. For us to do our quarterly DAISY awards and recognitions now is a monumental task that the council oversees. We have, I have my professional practice council does just culture reviews of critical incidents. My nursing informatics council is a huge policy-making body that helps us roll out information technology in the most sophisticated and successful ways. We have recognition for nurses on staff for 25-plus years. All of this done by them. This is where these concepts just take off and make your job 10 times, 100 times easier. So yes, we had it before I was here. It started as sort of, I think, checking a box and saying, yes, we have shared governance and we have these meetings, but we weren't executing it. It took a transformation in our leaders and our leadership team to begin to be able to engage them and empower them. We were still heroic leaders, and I was for the first 4 years at least that I was in the role.
Great, thank you. The next question, how do you get team members to be open with and willing to train others?
I'm assuming that's in the concepts of transformational leadership. I think it comes, again, from the top down. Whatever it is, I have to become that first. If I want my team to do it, I have to be good at it. I have to know that I have to work to be better at it. If not, I have to take the best practices from those who report to me and incorporate them into my skill set. And in just demonstrating that humility, I think people will begin. We've seen this happen. I think as we've committed to learning and developing in our careers, we have seen our staff do the same at every level of the organization. But again, it had to start with me. I had to go back to school. I had to seek these higher levels of and newer skill sets. And then as I did that, others did it. And now we've seen that the number of nurses who are certified has more than doubled in the last 3-4 years. Our BSN rate, when I first became CNO, our BSN rate was about 37%. Today it's over 60% and rising. And basically when I hire new grads, they know they're going back to school. And they're often telling me in new employee orientation, I'm a graduate of the 2-year program at Mercy Earth, and I've registered and I'm beginning classes for my BSN as new grads. That commitment to professional development starts to take off. And as people begin to acquire skills, they want to share them. And so we have no dearth, and we have no shortage of preceptors. We have no shortage of people who want to train. I have staff nurses. We have, in our clinical ladder, we reward people for taking on a special project. You have to have a special project to be at the top of the clinical ladder. I mentioned the Eagle's Nest program. One of my staff nurses serves as an instructor in the clinical internship program, that 4-week program that we put these kids off the street through. And that's her Senior Pro project. So I think by changing the culture and the engagement, you find people who just want to do this.
Thank you. We still have a few questions in the queue, but we are out of time. So if your question was not answered, please email them to C as in Cody Jones at traumanurses.org, and I'll forward them on to James, and we will answer those for you. And again, this presentation was recorded, and it will be available on the STN website by tomorrow afternoon. If you have any questions, please email me them. And thank you, James, for the great presentation.
Thank you.